Are you on a mid-range computer having FPS problems in Microsoft Flight Simulator 2024? If you are, then you may want to watch this video. So, as you can see guys, we are in the centre of London, which is obviously one of the more FPS consuming locations in the simulators, so it's a good place to test FPS. We're in, of course, the fly-by-wire A380, one of the most FPS consuming aircraft, and you can just see it's just not an enjoyable experience. And I will list my PC specs right now. There you go, so you can read them and pause the video, but you know, even I'd say I'm on the higher spectrum of medium spec computer, but it's just not playable. Look at this. So today I'm going to give you my settings on how I achieve 60 plus FPS and how you guys can do the same. So obviously, as you can see, we're averaging about 20 frames per second, even in the low teens when we're by those skyscrapers, and it's obviously not a fun experience. So firstly, we're just going to head into, no, we're not going to do that. We're going to head into our settings. So we're going to head into settings first, guys, and the first main thing we're going to do is these main graphics settings here, as I believe they are the most important. So the first thing I would do is, if you are on an NVIDIA graphics card, you want to be using DLSS Super, is it resolution? But yeah, you want to be using DLSS Super Resolution. And if you're on AMD, you want to be using AMD FSR 3. Now, the anti-aliasing kind of with the DLSS kind of, it makes it less clear when you're from further away. So when you zoom in on those flight displays, you're going to see the numbers. So say you're climbing in altitude, those numbers going up, it's going to be a lot more clearer, whereas where you're further away, it's a lot harder to see. It's basically downgrading the resolution. Now, I'm not an expert on PCs or flight sim or any of that, so just don't take what I'm saying for granted. This is just what I do as a common flight sim on how I achieve the best performance. Now, the next thing I do is change this NVIDIA DLSS Super Resolution to performance. So that's, I don't know, I'm not too sure what it does, but I don't set it to ultra performance, that'd be a bit too much for me. DLA, I don't really see a difference. Auto, I don't see a difference, but quality, I think that's just a slight FPS upgrade. FX sharpening now, I set that to about 100 because I just don't see the advantage going above 100. It does look a bit nicer and a bit clearer, but to be honest, below 100 is where it gets worse, and 100 is just that sweet spot for performance. Max frame rate, I have on to 60. Now, if I was recording or streaming, I would put that to about 30, so that I believe it just looks clearer on my Streamlabs, which is set to, so my recording software is set to recording at 60 frames per second, and you can just align that with whatever you want to record with. It will look much smoother when you're recording. But in terms of just casual playing, I set that to about 60, because I just don't see a difference after 60, to be honest. Frame generation is also another important one. I definitely have that onto AMD FSR 3. Even though it is AMD, it does work with NVIDIA, and it works fantastically in my opinion. So we'll leave that as it is. In terms of the global rendering, I have my terrain level of detail set to 150. Now, I'd say if you are doing more low-level flying, or in small aircraft such as Cessna Caravan, more default airplanes that are going to consume less FPS, then go for it. Definitely improve this to like 250 or 200. But in terms of, you know, we're doing cruising levels of 30,000 higher, then it doesn't really matter in my opinion, especially if we're flying airliners and stuff and more FPS consuming airplanes. So I leave off-screen precaution to high. I put displacement mappings on. Buildings, trees, plants, grass and rocks I all leave to high. I think anything low on high on buildings, it does look a bit dodgy, but it's playable. Same with trees and plants. I think rocks you can get away with medium as well if you want that extra performance, because you're obviously not really seeing them as much. Same with grass. Objects level of detail, I slide that way back to 100. Unless again you're doing low level flying, I really don't think it makes a difference. And this terrain level of detail on objects level of detail are the two highest FPS consuming sliders in my opinion in the sim, so I definitely leave them at least below half unless you're doing low level flying in less FPS consuming airplanes. Now, volumetric clouds I keep to high. Arguably you could set this to ultra, but for that maximum performance I just set it high, and it's not the biggest difference. Same with texture resolution. I definitely leave anisotropic filtering at 16x as opposed to a lower 8, sorry. Just looks a lot clearer at 16, to be honest, without impacting frames too much. Water waves you can get away with setting to medium or high, doesn't really matter. Retrace shadows, arguably, doesn't really make a difference for me. Same with shadow maps, train shadows, as long as I keep that below 124 and 512. I keep contact shadows at high, windshield effects at medium, but when it does rain, I do like to have that rainy effect, so I set that to ultra. Ambient occlusion, is set to high. Cube matte reflections 256. Ray marched reflection set to high, light shaft set to high, depth field high. I like to leave motion blur off, but that just really depends on the user, because it's if you like motion blur, to be honest, and if you do have it on, I know it can impact frames just a tiny bit, but really not a lot. Last couplet refresh rate, I'll have it high. Character quality medium. I leave all the character and airport stuff quite low to me, because it's just not important, but if you're doing things like career mode and you actually like that kind of stuff, then go for it, have it at higher, but it doesn't make the biggest difference, but just I leave it down for me. Now, fauna density, I like to have it low, because I just don't see them, and apparently they can have a little bit of impact on FPS, but you just leave them to low. Sea traffic, road traffic, you can definitely put these down to medium if you're not bothered by seeing, cars and roads. Seatbelt visibility doesn't really matter, and they are my graphics settings, and just from that alone, we're on 20 FPS on the fly-by-wire. We can see what that does. So we'll just fly around for a minute and see what the FPS rises to. So we're about 20 in the cockpit, and now it is at 45. Could be up to 50 as well some points, and this is in London, by the way, in the fly-by-wire A380, so if you're in any other aircraft, we can be doing 60 plus FPS, but this is the hardest aircraft to load in, obviously London. And you can see, so we've gone from 20 FPS to 46, and you can just see how much smoother it is as well. And you'd expect maybe a little bit less consistency at 46 frames, but this just looks really smooth in my opinion, and it works for me. And even though I did decrease the object level of detail and terrain, in my opinion, especially in the photographic scenery, it still looks good for me, Unless I was this low all the time in, less FPS consuming aircraft, it just doesn't really bother me. So in terms of out of the simulator and what you can do to improve your settings, it's been known people play with the NVIDIA control panel. Now, I don't use this too much. I have changed settings, and I'll show you what I have done in the past, but I don't see the biggest improvement in performance, so I'm not going to get into it too much. But if you are wondering how to do it, just search up NVIDIA control panel if you're on an NVIDIA card. You want to wait for this to load. So just wait a minute, and then you want to select your simulator. So let's find it here. Should be Microsoft Flight Simulator 2024. There it is. So in terms of what you can do, I'm aware people like to have power management mode to prefer maximum performance. So people set that to that, so that's another thing you can do. And to be honest, I don't see really any more settings people touch in the NVIDIA control panel except from that one, so that's the only one I would recommend personally. I don't see really that many performance boosts from that. Another thing you can do is you want to go to your NVIDIA app, and from the NVIDIA app you can update your driver for your NVIDIA card. So I do this from time to time. As you can see, I have a new game ready driver. So what you do is click install, you would install it, do express installation, and basically I'll just install the newest graphics drivers for your graphics card onto your PC, so that can maybe improve performance a little bit, but I'd always just stay up to date with your drivers. So guys, also one final thing, if you do want even more performance and frames, you can even get this this tool, and it's called lossless scaling. Now what lossless scaling does is it will get the frames you currently have, which I have 40, and it will basically just put artificial frames in front of those frames or behind those frames to give a more smoother appearance. Now here it is itself, and I'll leave my settings here as you can see. And basically what it does is when we click scale and we're in the simulator, it takes 5 seconds to apply. What it does do is, so we can see we're at 40 frames there in the sim. It does double it to 80. So it does appear as if we're 80 frames per second, as you can see, which is very smooth. Now, there are some side effects to this. That is, you're not actually flying the airplane in 80 frames per second. So these movements here are not in 80 frames per second. So say you were at 10 frames per second, and that was now due to loss of scaling at 30 frames. Now, because you're at 30 frames, but you're actually flying the aircraft at 10 frames, it's going to be a bit harder because the inputs you'll put into the simulators is at 10 frames per second, but it will look a bit smoother. So I'd only recommend using that lossless scaling if you're averaging above 30 FPS, so that those inputs from your flight controls are going to be a bit smoother. So I hope that does help. And if you have any other questions, please let me know down below. I'm not an expert, as I said, and it's just something that I do to get, you know, higher frame rates that people have complimented me for in my videos. So it's just a little something I do, as you can see.